Good morning. Remember the first generation of this car? Based on the mechanics of the Mazda Bongo, the vehicle may not have been very pretty, but it had a group of supporters and was not too prone to failures. It was even produced in Germany in 1995 to 1998, so if someone got a Sportage from those years, they had an SUV produced by our neighbors across the Oder. Then came the second generation, which may still not have been too bold in terms of style, but it was more in line with the needs of customers looking for a more civilized SUV. There was even a version with a V6 engine. You could complain that this car is still very Korean in appearance, but on the other hand, the third generation of the compact SUV from Korea was like a shot in the... like a bucket of cold water for local manufacturers. Kia offered customers a car that was not only quite refined, but also, finally, stood out from the crowd. And it still does, hence the undiminished interest in the Sportage on the secondary market, although now the fifth generation is entering showrooms. So since the Sportage III, factory designation SL, is so well liked, it's worth taking a look at what engine versions were offered and which ones are worth recommending. Throughout the production period of the Sportage SL, all petrol engines used were naturally aspirated, i.e. they did not have turbocharging or a mechanical compressor. The range, both before and after the facelift, which took place in the spring of 2014, was opened by the 1.6 GDI unit. These three letters stand for gasoline direct injection, i.e. direct fuel injection, which questions the point of using a gas system. You can install one that injects LPG in an intelligent way, then the engine usually burns 3/4 gas and 1/4 petrol. The proportions depend on the driving style. In most cases, these 135 horsepower units do not cause any major problems, but with acceleration to 100 km per hour in 11.5 seconds, they can only be recommended to calmer drivers. It is also worth bearing in mind that at the beginning of production, there was a batch of cars in which the connecting rod bearings would turn after about 100,000 kilometers. Occasionally there are problems with ignition and timing drive, and possibly also with oil consumption. Initially, the manufacturer recommended changing the oil every 15 and later every 30,000 kilometers, but mechanics often advise not to exceed 10-12,000 kilometers without changing the lubricant. Average fuel consumption for the 1.6 GDI version is about 8 to 8.5 L 100 kilometers. The most economical drivers go down to around 7 L. A heavy foot results in increased fuel consumption to about 9.5 L 100 kilometers. Another option is the 2.0 CVVT unit with 163 HP, used until January 2014. On the plus side, we should mention the multi-point fuel injection. Fewer problems with LPG installation, no potential problems with carbon deposits on the valves, and basically no significant operating problems. The engine is relatively simple in design and has more energy than the 1.6, but unfortunately it also burns more, so the note about LPG may apply here. According to users of the spritmonitor.de website, something like our Motostat, but with a much larger database of results, the Sportage 2.0 CVVT consumes an average of even 10 to 11 L/100 kilometers, although it should be mentioned here that many models have four-wheel drive and/or automatic transmission, which affects fuel consumption. The economical ones go down to less than 9 L 100 kilometers, while a sandal on the parquet floor and regular driving on motorways means exceeding 12 liters just as regularly. We are still talking about average fuel consumption. Individual refueling reports indicate that it exceeds 13 or 14 L 100 kilometers. The last petrol version offered on our market was the 2.0 GDI engine with 166 HP. It replaced the aforementioned version with multi-point injection. It has no major flaws, but it is not much different in terms of fuel consumption from the CVVT version. So does it have any additional advantages? Well, it does, but nothing special. Cars with 2.0 GDI are slightly more dynamic and simply newer. They were only produced in 2014-2015. They also have a different gearbox. More on that in a moment. The Korean car used a 2-liter CRDI engine with 136 horsepower throughout its production run, and a slightly shorter run saw the 115 horsepower 1.7 CRDI. In the second half of 2011, a 184 horsepower version of the larger diesel engine was added to the offer. The smallest of the listed engines is the one known from the Optima. The problem is that even in the D-segment sedan, it was considered too weakly dynamic, and there it had 136 HP. As you can easily guess, in the slightly heavier Sportage, the weakened version definitely has something to do. Maximum torque here barely reaches 260 Nm. In the Optima, it is 320 to 325 Nm. The consolation is the relatively pleasant sound. This is of course a subjective matter. And good durability, although it should be noted that a batch of these engines had problems with the head gasket. In some cases, repairing/replacing the head, and of course the gasket itself, helped, but there are also known cases of replacing the entire post. You also have to watch out for clogged fuel pre-cleaning sieves. The chain timing is durable, but not eternal. Cars with higher mileage, like approx 300,000 kilometers, may require its replacement. Average diesel consumption for this version typically ranges from 5.5 to 7.5 L per 100 kilometers, depending on driving style and road conditions. Mechanics recommend the 2-liter R-Series engines more. I emphasize this so that someone doesn't think that we are still dealing with the slightly less successful D-Series units developed by the Italian VM and used, among others, in the second-generation Sportage. Their durability is similarly high in both power versions, better than in the already good 1.7 CRDI, so of course it is worth looking for the more powerful one, especially since there are basically no differences in fuel consumption, average 6.8 to 10 L 100 kilometers. There are very few repeatable faults here. In this group we should mention belt pulley failures, may require replacement every 80–100,000 kilometers, and various sensors. Both smaller and larger diesels use so-called dry particulate filters. They are not more prone to failures than those of the competition, but they are also not very fond of continuous city driving. For this reason, the Sportage with a diesel engine is a better choice for mixed driving or simply for the route. Quite typically for compact SUVs, the Kia Sportage SL was offered with front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. Of course, in the latter case, the rear-wheel drive was part-time, not permanent. The AWD versions were no big deal, with the occasional axle shaft milling. Four-wheel drive was standard on the 184 bhp diesel and optional on the other 2-liter versions. It wasn't available with the 1.6 GDI and 1.7 CRDI engines. In the third-generation Sportage, there are manual and automatic gearboxes. The former can have 5. In the 2.0 CVVT, this is the aforementioned flaw compared to the 2.0 GDI, or 6 gears, all other variants. Contrary to what one might expect, they do not necessarily boast high durability, especially if they are handled carelessly. This applies mainly to the top diesel, but not only. Synchronizers and bearings cause problems, leaks occur. In addition, there is the issue of not very durable clutches and dual-mass flywheels. The issue of the latter does not apply to the 1.7 CRDI version, because they were not used there. The alternative to manuals was a 6-speed automatic. Opinions about it are better than about mechanical transmissions, provided that you take care of regular oil changes. However, it increases fuel consumption and worsens dynamics. Although the Kia Sportage III struggles with several problems from other categories, including rapid suspension wear and chassis corrosion, the engines in this model are definitely the strong point of the Korean SUV. They are not necessarily speed demons, but it is rare in competitive cars that no engine in the range should be clearly discouraged. The best thing about it all is that none of the versions are some kind of rare second-hand market rarity, so you can calmly comb through offers in search of the right car. No wonder customers are looking for these cars, and prices are falling very slowly. And if you know of any common errors, your comments are welcome.